How's your heart today? Some thoughts only find us when the room finally gets quiet. Not because we are trying to be dramatic, but because the day stops distracting us long enough for everything real to sit down beside us. Tonight's letters are for anyone who has stayed up a little later than they meant to. Staring at a dark window or an empty table, feeling their whole life arrive in one slow wave. Family, love, regret, growing older, becoming someone new, it can all feel heavier when no one else is in the room. But sometimes those quiet moments also tell the truth more gently than noise ever could. Let's begin with the kind of night many of us know by heart. Letter 1. I did not mean to sit in my parents' kitchen for almost an hour after everyone went to bed. I had only come home for one night. My mother packed too much food as usual. My father asked if my car needed gas even though I had filled it that afternoon. We ate dinner in the same seats we always have. Nothing special happened, and somehow that made it worse. After they went upstairs, I stayed at the table with one small light on over the stove and a glass of water warming in my hand. The sink had been wiped clean. My mother's folded dish towel hung neatly over the oven handle. My father had already locked the back door. It was an ordinary house on an ordinary night, and I suddenly felt like I was sitting inside time itself. I looked around and started noticing things I never used to notice. The fruit bowl had fewer oranges, because my mother says citrus hurts her stomach now. My father had placed his reading glasses beside the newspaper instead of on top of it. There was a slight hesitation in the hallway earlier when my mother stood up too fast from the table. I had seen it and pretended not to. That is what I was thinking about in the kitchen. Not one dramatic thing, just the quiet evidence that my parents are getting older while I keep talking to them like there will always be more time. I call them often enough. I visit when I can. I send photos. I answer my mother's practical questions. I text my father when I reach home. On paper, I am a good daughter. But that night, sitting there alone, I realized how much of our relationship now lives in efficient updates. How are you? Fine. How is work? Bostu. Did you eat? Yes. When are you coming again? Soon. Soon is such a dangerous word. It sounds loving. It sounds responsible. But sometimes it is only a softer way of saying not now. I started thinking about all the things I still had not asked them. How my mother felt when I moved out and the house got quieter. Whether my father was ever scared when money was tight and he never let us see it. Whether they noticed their own aging, in the same secret way, I notice it in them. Then I thought about smaller things that somehow hurt more. The way my mother still buys the yogurt I liked in high school, even though I barely eat it now. The way my father still leaves the porch light on if I drive back late. The way they never say, "We miss you so much it changes the shape of our week." Instead, they say, "Drive carefully." They say, "Take some leftovers." They say, "Text when you get there." And sitting alone in that kitchen, I finally understood how much love can hide inside practical language. Part of why those nights feel so full is because solitude removes the excuses. When I am alone, I cannot blame work or traffic, or tiredness for why I have not asked better questions. I have to face the truth that love needs attention while people are still here to receive it. A few minutes later I heard soft footsteps, and turned to see my mother in the hallway, half awake, asking why I was still up. I almost told her everything, that I was scared, that I hated seeing time move across their faces, that I did not know how to love people without always assuming there would be another visit, another ordinary Tuesday. Instead I smiled and said, "Just water." She nodded, came over, touched my shoulder for a second, and said, "Don't sleep too late. The road is longer when you're tired." Then she went back upstairs. And I sat there with tears in my eyes. Because even then, in the middle of the night, she was still being a mother in the simplest possible sentence. The next morning, before I left, I did one small thing differently. I did not rush out after coffee. I asked my father about the first job he ever had. I asked my mother what she wanted more of this year besides good health. We ended up talking longer than usual. Nothing profound was solved, but the room felt fuller, like we had stepped back into each other instead of just passing through our roles. Now, when I sit alone and think about everything, I still feel that ache. But it is no longer only fear. It is also instruction. Call while there is still something every day to ask. Stay at the table 10 minutes longer. Say the bigger thing, even if your voice shakes. Love people before memory is all that is left to practice on. Host transition. Sometimes the quietest rooms tell us where we have been living on autopilot. And sometimes that realization is not there to punish us, only to wake us up a little. Letter 2. The loneliest moment in my relationship did not happen during an argument. It happened in my car after a perfectly normal dinner. We had gone to a small place near our apartment, the kind of place with warm lighting and meals we could afford without thinking too hard. We talked about practical things, his meeting next week, my sister's new job, whether the rent might go up again. We were kind to each other. We even laughed. Then we got home, parked outside, and he went upstairs first because he needed to send one last email before bed. I said I would come in after a minute. I did not. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, and the streetlights reflected on the windshield. Someone in another building was washing dishes. A television flickered behind thin curtains across the street. Life was happening everywhere in these small, ordinary ways, and I just sat there with my hands in my lap feeling like I had somehow drifted to the edge of my own life. Nothing was wrong enough to point at. That was the problem. He is a good man. He remembers to buy oat milk because mine runs out faster than his. He checks whether I lock the door when I am already half asleep. He warms my side of the bed if I am still brushing my teeth. There is love in our home, I know that, but sitting in the car that night, I had to admit something I had been avoiding for months. I had become easier to live with than to know. I started thinking about how often I say, "I'm just tired," when what I mean is, I feel stretched so thin I can no longer hear myself clearly. How often he says, "Work is a lot right now," when what he means is probably much larger and more human than he allows himself to say. We have become excellent at maintaining a shared life. Groceries, bills, plans, family obligations, dentist appointments, clean towels. But maintenance is not the same as intimacy. And solitude has a cruel way of showing you the difference. In the car, I replayed dinner and realized neither of us had asked one real question, not one. We exchanged information, we coordinated life, yet I could not remember the last time either of us had said, "What has been heavy for you lately?" I think many people imagine emotional distance arriving dramatically, but often it arrives like this instead. Two tired people who still care, slowly speaking in summaries because full honesty requires energy they have both been spending elsewhere. I stayed in that parked car so long that he eventually texted, "Everything okay?" I looked at the message and started crying before I understood why. Because the truthful answer was both simple and impossible. Everything was okay, and something was missing anyway. When I finally went upstairs, he was sitting on the couch, in an old t-shirt, waiting. He muted the television and said, "You were gone a while." I could have protected us with a familiar answer. Instead, I sat beside him and said, "I think I've been lonely with you, and I don't want that to become normal." The room changed instantly, not dramatically, just honestly. He looked stunned, then sad in a way that made me realize he might have been carrying his own version of the same feeling. We talked for over an hour, not perfectly. We admitted how exhausted we had both become, how much of ourselves we had been bringing home already flattened by the day, how love had not disappeared, but depth had been postponed too many nights in a row. That conversation did not fix us in one evening, but it returned something vital, evidence that we were still willing to be known. Now, when I sit alone and think about everything, I do not automatically assume solitude means something is broken. Sometimes it simply means truth is near. Sometimes the quiet of a parked car is where we finally stop performing competence long enough to notice what our hearts have been asking for. The hardest part was not admitting I felt lonely. The hardest part was admitting I wanted more while there was still love left to build on. Post-transition. Being alone with your thoughts can feel heavy. But sometimes it is the exact place where denial runs out and tenderness gets another chance. Letter 3. My birthday ended at 11:48 p.m. with me sitting on the floor beside my bed, still wearing one earring and staring at a paper bag from the bakery. The day itself had been fine. Coworkers signed a card. My brother called. Friends sent voice notes. Someone brought flowers. I went out for dinner with 3 people I genuinely love. We laughed. We took photos. I came home with leftovers and a headache from smiling too much. And then the apartment got quiet. I put the flowers in water. I plugged in my phone. I took off my shoes and one earring, then forgot about the other one completely. I meant to shower and sleep. Instead, I sat down on the floor for just a second, and somehow that second opened into a long private inventory of my whole life. Birthdays do that to me. Not every year, but enough. Maybe because they create a small pause in the noise. A moment where everyone is briefly looking at your life from the outside, and then the messages stop and you are left with the inside of it. Your actual habits. Your real disappointments. The things you are proud of but never say out loud. The calls you keep postponing. The versions of yourself you outgrew without properly grieving. That night I thought about a friend I no longer speak to every week. Though we once narrated our days to each other in real time. I thought about how many people still know the older version of me better than the current one. I thought about the apartment I worked so hard to afford, and how rarely I let myself enjoy it because I am always planning the next thing. I thought about my body, my time, my family, and the strange adult ache of being both grateful and unsettled at once. Most of all, I thought about the younger version of myself, who used to imagine that by this age I would feel more certain. Not perfect, just clearer. More arrived, less divided. Instead, I have become someone with a full calendar and unanswered questions. Someone who can handle emergencies, deadlines, and travel bookings, but still gets startled by quiet because quiet tells the truth too directly. I remembered being 22 and sitting on a different floor in a different apartment, certain that once I got older I would stop second-guessing myself. I would know who mattered. I would stop feeling guilty all the time. I would stop imagining that everybody else had secretly been given a handbook for adulthood. I smiled thinking about that younger version of me. Not because she was foolish, but because she was trying so hard. She thought growth would look like finally becoming effortless. It does not. At some point that night I opened the bakery bag and ate a forkful of cake straight from the box. The icing had softened. The candle was still tucked into the side where the bakery had placed it. I had forgotten to use it. That detail made me unexpectedly emotional. Not because the day had been bad, it hadn't. But because it felt symbolic of how often I move through my own life efficiently, appreciatively, responsibly, and still slightly absent. Like I am always arriving half a beat late to my own moments. Sitting there on the floor, I realized I had spent the past year being very dependable and not very present, showing up for work, showing up for family, returning calls, meeting deadlines, being the version of myself other people can count on. And quietly, underneath all that, I had been waiting for permission to become real again. Not irresponsible, not dramatic, just real. The kind of real that says, I am tired in a deeper way than sleep fixes. I miss people I technically still have access to. I am proud of how far I have come and also grieving what it cost me. I want a softer life than the one I keep proving I can survive. No one was there to hear me think any of that. Maybe that was why it came out so clearly. I ended up writing a note in my phone before bed. Nothing polished, just a few honest lines. Slow down enough to belong to your own life. Call people before they become memories you only visit mentally. Stop treating joy like something you can fully enjoy later. You are not behind. You are just here, and here needs your attention too. I still read that note sometimes. There are nights now when I sit alone and think about everything again. The habit has not disappeared, but it does not scare me the way it used to. I no longer hear those nights only as evidence that I am lost. Sometimes they are simply where my life catches up with me. If I could send one message back through time to the younger me, the busier me, the more distracted me, it would be this. Being alone with your thoughts is not always a failure of joy. Sometimes it is how your heart asks to be included in the life your hands have been managing. Host closing. Maybe that is why these quiet nights matter so much. Not because they are comfortable, but because they gather the pieces we keep scattering during the day and place them back in front of us with surprising honesty. Family, love, grief, longing, gratitude, fatigue, hope. They can all arrive at once when we sit alone long enough to notice. If tonight felt familiar, I hope it did not only stir something tender, but also gave you a gentler way to listen to yourself. You do not have to solve everything in one night. Sometimes it is enough to stay with the truth for a minute longer and let it soften into clarity. And if this episode kept you company, I hope you'll stay close to Mind Light and bring your quiet thoughts here again.